we can only accept a third of what we can normally accept. So we're having to relearn our business while we were only just getting to know our business as a hospitality venue, as a brew pub, as this kind of new version of a public meeting house that we were creating. So it's got, both so much upside and so many challenges that we're working through as a company.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. The clarity of what's important and the determination to make the most of it are some of the positives to emerge from the events of the last year. That realization is fueling the appetite of many professionals to get out there and achieve the things they only dreamed about until now. This is creating some incredible opportunities for some, and in turn, some amazing offerings for consumers too. Rose Kentish is the owner of Rose Kentish Wines and co-founder of Sparkke. Rose, how are you going?
Very well, thanks, Anthony.
Rose, you seem to be doing more things than just about anyone in Australia at the moment. You've got a lot going on.
Yes.
Tell us about how life is at the moment.
Look, I had hoped that 2021 was going to bring a certain calmness and clarity after the year that everyone's just had, both for me and the world that we're living in. But I seem to be failing at reducing what I'm doing, because I just feel passionate on all fronts about all things that I'm involved in. So I'm just kind of, plugging in the seatbelt and getting myself ready for another big year, I think. Well, it's already happening anyway.
There's a lot to talk about, but you're currently getting through a vintage in McClaren Vale, and your first was a couple of decades ago. What's the vintage looking like at the moment?
Look, it's a really lovely vintage. We've got quite moderate weather at the moment, so it's just very, very calm and straightforward in terms of, often we get quite a lot of heat in March in McClaren Vale, and so there's often this kind of real bottleneck or jam in terms of getting your fruit picked and through the winery. But I'm doing a very small vintage this year of red grapes out of McClaren Vale, so for me it's very accessible, very straightforward, and we're just kind of pushing through a couple of small hand picks with my team, and I'll be on and out the other side pretty quickly.
With the bushfires that we had the previous summer and then the pandemic, what sort of impact has that had on what you do with the wines and the sort of wines that have been created? Yeah,
look, for me, it's been quite interesting. I wasn't impacted by the bushfires. I did just buy a farm on Kangaroo Island, which was burnt out before we bought it. So I've got all of that ahead of me in terms of learning to understand and live in an environment, or at least be a part of an environment. I might not live there, but being, someone that's running a regenerative farm on the island and learning to live with fire. As a winemaker on the mainland, though, my focus wasn't impacted by the fires per se. I did get very involved in assisting people who'd been affected. So we ran a dinner at Sparkke, which is a company I'm a co-founder of based in South Australia, and we generated quite a lot of funds to support people who'd been burnt by pulling their wines through our venue, doing a big dinner, and using wines only from producers that have been deeply affected by the fire. So I tried to get in and help in that way. The pandemic, though, I guess it has affected me as a winemaker. I realised that I was pretty invested and have always been working really closely with chefs around Australia, and my wines, I really love the space in which they're on the tables and in people's glasses. And I've been working very much in the on-premise space with chefs and sommeliers. And so that just showed me that I was probably more invested in that space of the restaurants and bars and less in the bottle shop space. So I definitely have my wines in some of the independent retailers around Australia. but to a much lesser extent, really just to support what was happening in the restaurants and bars. And so in a way, because the restaurants, a lot of them closed down or had to really adjust what they were doing in 2020, my market contracted pretty quickly. However, I'm a small batch winemaker. I have a really deep, loyal following in that space. So as soon as things have been sort of opening up and moving a bit more freely around Australia, that certainly has righted itself. And I've been making wine for, as you said, for quite a few years now. So I guess I'm lucky in that I'm not here for the short term. I'll be making wine when I'm 80 and beyond, I imagine. So I just really, luckily wine's one of those things that does beautifully in the cellar. So I'm not worried about things aging. I'm encouraging that and lucky consumers or customers that get to drink the wine with just a few more months in the bottle than they normally would have, or that I haven't run out for the vintage supply.
You mentioned that your wine is normally headed towards restaurants and they had it tough for the last year, but you also involved with a venue, a Sparkke at the Whitmore, that would have been heavily impacted. Tell us a bit about that venue and how it started and sort of what the first 2 years of trade has been like.
Sure. Look, I used to drive past through the centre of Adelaide as I was looking for a great site for our young team to start brewing beer within the CBD or very close to the CBD radius. Sparkke, we started nearly 5 years ago. My co-founder, Carrie Allen, and I started it as a platform to really lift and amplify female makers in the alcohol space. And we had been gypsy brewing in other people's breweries, and we knew that it was time to really get our own makers space sorted. And we were eyeing off a space nearby in one of the inner suburbs of Adelaide. And I kept driving past this old pub that was closed right in the CBD on one of the squares called Whitmore Square. And I thought, that would be perfect. It's like in the heart of the city. It's for the people. It's putting our money where our mouth is, in that it's on a square that's had, some pretty deep social problems. And Sparkke's a social enterprise, a for-profit and for-purpose enterprise. So I just thought, that would be incredible. And so we started a negotiation period with the owners to see if we could lease it. And we thought, a bit of a fix-up paint job, and we'll open the doors and we'll be right. Old pub, really, really patchy background history. It used to be a stripper joint. It used to be one of Australia's most successful TABs with 56 phone lines terminating into it. It had pokies in the front room that we didn't want to have anything to do with. And, pretty tacky and disgusting place, but this incredibly beautiful old stone building. And as soon as we sort of got in there and started to we hadn't opened, but we were starting to design a brew kit that might fit in there, because we wanted a space that we could brew, even if it was as a microbrewery. And pretty quickly we realised that in order to fit a kit in there that made sense on any commercial level, we'd need to buy the place and knock half of it down and build on. And so we did that. We negotiated to buy it, and then went, crikey, we better go and find some investors and help us buy the real estate, because we're in the business of brewing, not real estate. And we pulled together an investment group, spent a couple of $1 million on the renovation, and won some major national awards for the renovation that we did, of building and renovation, and found an old pub in the meantime within the pub. So by restoring it and chipping away at some walls, we found external sign writing for the Queen's Arms Hotel, which was a hotel that had been lost in the history of South Australia. And it's one of the first couple of licences that were taken out in South Australia within a couple of years of colonisation back in 1838. So it was pretty cool. But, we've been open for 2 years, and half of our life in that building as our venue and our brewing space, we've been in COVID. So we had a really amazing first year, but still doing CapEx works upstairs, opening a rooftop bar, etc. literally a couple of months before we were closed down for COVID, or we actually chose to close before the government insisted, in order for the team to kind of adjust and us to discuss what we could do as a closed venue to still deliver and work as a team and do good work, not knowing how long COVID would go for. So pretty crazy, pretty intense time. Yeah.
What's it like at the moment?
We're still in this new normal of COVID. So as a business and as a venue, we're operating at a third of our capacity. So we're still limited by COVID, but it looks normal in terms of everyone's walking around with no masks and, expecting service as normal. But we can only accept a third of our license in terms of the number of people that can come into the building. And we're still cleaning based on COVID, our own COVID requirements and regulations that we've put in place ourselves. So we're still following all of the COVID practices, not sharing food. People have to sign in when they come in. We're wiping all the major public services every hour. Like, we've still got all of these great practices in place so that people want to come to our venue and feel really safe and really good. But all of that has a cost. We can only accept a third of what we can normally accept. So we're having to relearn our business while we were only just getting to know our business as a hospitality venue, as a brew pub, as this kind of new version of a public meeting house that we were creating. The other thing we did is just before COVID, so in November 2019, we bought an old pub in Melbourne. And we haven't been able to get there. So the last time we went there was literally sort of February 2020. And we've put a deposit down on this old building, did nearly all of the development approval work, because yet again, we've bought an old heritage listed pub that needs major work done to it. And there she sits, and we haven't been able to continue. So we're a business that's highly aspirational and deeply hampered at the moment. So it's got, both so much upside and so many challenges that we're working through as a company.
You mentioned that you like to take on so many things because you get excited by them, and there are so many things you would like to achieve. One of them you briefly mentioned was the regenerative farm on Kangaroo Island. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So Sam and I, my husband Sam Harrison, who's a painter by trade and artist, he and I have worked together all our lives. We met at uni in my early 20s and his mid-20s, and we've really done viticulture as our main together work. And we also set up our own wine bar and restaurant in the ground floor of an old flour mill down at Middleton in South Australia. For about 18 months, we ran that venue together. We only stopped because it was so successful. We were having trouble running our 4 very young children in an old flour mill with 120 people eating and drinking. So we decided that in the end we really loved living there, and it was our home, because we did consider moving out and making more of that. But in the end kept saying, but it's our home. So we turned that into just a cellar door for my wines, Rose Kentish wines, which we open by appointment. And really since we sold our last vineyard in McClaren Vale, I still make wine from other growers' grapes in McClaren Vale, but we don't grow and haven't grown our own grapes since 2016. He and I have been looking for a horticultural project or a horticultural farm space, land, in which we can contribute as kind of a legacy piece. And we had been discussing if that was going to be another vineyard or more into the roots of farming, which are more back to my childhood roots. I grew up on land with stock and vegetable growing and all sorts of stuff down in the southeast of South Australia. And Sam, my husband, grew up on the vineyard, which we subsequently bought back in the mid-90s. So we thought there's a project for us together again on farming land, and we wanted to do it with we're both deeply interested in regenerative practices. We'd used very similar practices around organics and biodynamics on the vineyards, but we weren't registered. We just were following, learning, and developing our understanding as we've been going along. But regeneration as a concept really appeals to us, to really work on the health of the soil, and therefore the animals and anything you choose to grow there will benefit. And so we had been actually looking in Tassie, and again, because I was thinking about grape growing and a natural space for me to look outside of the mainland, if we were going to look to a place that also felt a bit like a place to retreat to or get away to on some level. And then through COVID, we kind of looked to our own island in our own state of Kangaroo Island and thought, hang on a second, we've got an island right close by, much easier for us to get to, and that's something that I guess the lack of being able to travel in COVID really showed us. And we just happened to be talking to various farmers on the island, and one of them said, actually, I might be interested in selling a 300-acre block of land on the cliff tops looking north, very remote, on the very west of the island. Come and have a look, see what you think. And so we went and we walked around. We took our 4 teenage and young adult children with us and walked around, and there was something that resonated with us on that parcel of land. It had been fully burnt and refenced, most of it refenced, and but there was something about it that spoke to us, and we all said we can create something here. There was no building structures or anything on there, so we thought there's both a piece here in terms of building something off the grid that is fully about sustainability and regeneration that we can do. So Sam and I've built and renovated and built things through our lives, so we've got a real love for that, and we've got a building project at the moment in our garden at the back of the mill, which we're nearly finished. So when we finish that, we'll be ready, and we're just starting in the very early stages of understanding what the building might need to be, what technology it might house in order to sit lightly on the earth and actually function itself without any need for grid power or town water or any of those things, and to be really resilient against fire. So that's a project for us. So at the moment, there's just 130 sheep on there that occasionally run loose, and we have to go over the island and find them on other people's farms and walk them home again. And we get to go there, and as soon as we go across the water, there's this real sense of getting away, but also for us to come together and do that project together is a really beautiful thing.
You just briefly mentioned another project that's about to come to fruition, which is a retreat just behind the old flour mill. Tell us a little bit about that and how that came about.
Yeah, look, really interesting. This has been a 4-year building project for Sam and I, and which means he hasn't picked up an artist's paintbrush for a little while. But we had an L shape of buildings in the garden. We've got 2 acres of garden behind this old flour mill in Middleton, which we've been told, I've never got this validated, but we've been told that the mill that we live in is our family home, is the biggest freestanding mill in the southern hemisphere remaining. And apparently there were about 15 stone mills all along the south coast of South Australia. And a long time ago, 1850s, farmers used to, from their barley and wheat crops, be able to load onto riverboats their harvest, and it would be then boated down to the mouth of the Murray, loaded onto the first narrow gauge railway, and then brought up to our mill and ground, and probably other mills along the coastline, ground into flour, and then loaded out of Port Elliot and Victor Harbour. This is before Port Adelaide was an international port. And that was very successful for about 80, 70 to 90 years, somewhere in there. But they had a lot of shipwrecks. The harbours were too shallow and it was really causing them a lot of problems. So they moved all of the international port activity up to Port Adelaide. And so that really made the mill in that location quite defunct. And it then had this really interesting history over time where it became a stock and feed place and, had dirt floors, and there was a stable, an L-shaped building. It was a stable, an old fernery and a barn. And these date back to 1850, and they were withering away. The brickwork was withering away, and we felt and we still feel that we're custodians and that we've got a responsibility to keep these buildings intact. And so we started a project of really putting proper roof structure on them and restoring the walls, and then decided that there was probably a way to do this because, obviously to do any more than that is quite expensive and extensive. And so we kind of walked through these spaces and thought, if we put a pool in here in the centre of the L shape and turned these buildings into 4 king-size bedrooms with their own bathrooms, and we have a structure, an area which is essential living, cooking, enjoyment space, and people could come in a really private location and just be, and they can write and they can read and they can sleep, or they could use it as a base to then really connect in with producers, chefs, physical experiences such as, there's some incredible walks, kayaking, all sorts of things to do on the Fleurieu. So we could offer a space which would then use those buildings and make sense of the money that we needed to spend there to do the work. And in a very private, almost reclusive way for people to come and be in a private garden, but at their own ability to come and go. And so we've been restoring. Sam's using his artisanal ability, and he's got, as we've been farmers, and, the fact that you need to create and build a lot of the things that you need to fix things and do things on farms. And also we've renovated a couple of houses in Adelaide over the years. He's done an extraordinary job so far. We're nearly done in bringing these old buildings not only back to life, but essentially creating almost like a micro hotel or it's really hard to define. There's nothing really like it that I can see, because it's not, I can say more what it's not than what it is. But if you can imagine that you've got these very luxurious spaces where everything in them has been made in a really refined way, and where we haven't made them, we've engaged, say, some of the glass blowers at the jam factory in Adelaide to blow the glass lights, or one of the furniture makers is hand making these incredible mirrors for us, and there'll be artwork and extraordinary linen and beds so that you just have the best sleeps. It's really about creating a sanctuary for people to just come and relax, and it's got a 15 by 5 metre pool that you can relax in, and a spa, and just the ability to just be in this incredible old established garden that's right in the heart of the village. And we've called it Pargo, and Pargo is Latin for village, and we wanted to acknowledge that we're in a village, so we've got the busyness of that. You can walk down the street and get a coffee or some lunch or whatever you feel like, but you're also in a space that took a village to build, and that's right from the beginning of when it was built through to now, all of the artisans working on creating these spaces. So we're nearly there. I'm working on a book that people can come and flip through. A book might not be the right word, maybe a compendium that's going to be in the rooms that really takes people on a journey and tells them about some of the artisans and chefs and producers and Indigenous elders and various people that they can connect with and enjoy and experience something of the region without being a particularly touristy thing. So really connecting in with makers and getting under the skin of the region in a way that locals can show you rather than just being a tourist experience.
Give us a sense of what life is like on the property. I understand you have an orchard there and you spent some time in it yesterday. What is life like there?
We've got a productive garden that we tend. I use the word we very loosely because it's my husband that tends it, and I'm still based most of the time in Adelaide. Our youngest is just in year 12 this year, so when he's done, I'll be moving back down there. But I do spend a lot of time in the garden on the weekends. We've got an old orchard that was planted, old. It's about 20 years old, so it's probably just about to hit a really nice stage of productivity and maturity. But we've also got, I've used from making years and years of doing traditional method riddling of sparkling Shiraz. I've got old wooden crates which instead of just breaking them down and or passing them on, we've actually kept and filled them with beautiful soil that we've built up over time, and we fill those with all sorts of seeds and seedlings and run a pretty productive garden. So we pretty much eat out of the garden and give a lot of our produce to friends. We've got chooks, and so we, other than probably protein and dairy, we're pretty self-sufficient between the fruit and veg that we grow, and that's an extraordinary thing to do in terms it just is so beautiful. The difference in the produce is from what you can get in a supermarket is obviously a no-brainer, but we also love that bartering and exchange process. So we do a lot of that with wine and veggies to swap with, fantastic local coffee roasters for beans and all of that sort of thing. And I love that part that food and wine and brews and gin and things that I make all allow you to be able to share and exchange with the things that you do well for the things that other people do well, so that your life is richer because you get to enjoy things that are made in and around you or grown in and around you, and you get to share that, which is really something that feeds me as a maker, I think. So yes, yesterday I spent a good chunk of the day picking quinces, and I've cooked them all down, and the intention is to use some obviously to eat and make cakes with and things like that. But the majority of them I'm actually going to distill. And for Sparkke, we started distilling a couple of years ago, but in a very focused way in 2020 and into 21. So I'm going to make a quince gin for Sparkke. So a lot of fun. And a lot of ideas and smells and things that give me ideas by just spending time in the garden and in the orchard. I start to think of all the things that I could be making and sharing with others.
Where did it all start for you? Where did that interest in food and wine and the connection to the land begin?
Yeah, it's a good question. I grew up about a mile down the road from my grandparents. So I'm the youngest of 4 children, raised on a farm down the road, and my dad was the eldest of 6 children, and his dad passed away when he was quite young, and so he sort of immediately became the oldest child in terms of pulling everyone along on the farming journey with him as a young dad himself. And we used to be given a lot of responsibility in terms of going down to my grandmother's really established garden and learning from her how to pick the asparagus correctly from the asparagus bed to leave asparagus for next year, but also get the beauty of this year in the harvest. Or I used to have a little Honda 70, and my job was to ride round to the dairy, which was about 2 kilometres from our front gate, and pick up a bucket of milk, clip the lid on, put it between, on the seat between my legs and hold on, and ride one-handed home with a bucket of milk, which I then had to skim off the cream, make the butter, churn the butter from that, and and work with my mum was, well, my mum was amazing in that she really took the job of parenting and running a home seriously as a career. So she loved everything about being a mum and raising the four of us and teaching us the natural harmony of how you produce from your garden and how you connect with other producers around you in order to do that. So, and then we also had a lot of international exchange students that would come every year from all around the globe and then bring their food influence into our homes. So, one year there was about 30 big rounds about the size of a pizza each of speculoos that my mum had made with the Dutch exchange student. And, Japanese, we learned to make sushi. And, this is in the 70s when that wasn't kind of done. And so there was a big food influence from my parents in their desire to entertain, throw the doors open. We were the place where people just came and big parties happened, and it was just never a problem. You just made all of that work, and everything was kind of done from scratch. So I've never really been afraid of that. And in fact, I've quite loved it and thought it quite normal to make things and make them from scratch and enjoy that process of then sharing that. And I know in my 20s, I'd done a degree not in winemaking, in something different, but I found myself taking a lot of wine electives around wine marketing, wine tasting, just basic wine education, learning, and sort of history about winemaking, all sorts of stuff. And I didn't really think about it. I thought about it more as just this fascination with producing and making. And it was actually my husband that woke me up in the middle of the night when I was 25, and we had one little toddler, and we just sold our house in Adelaide, done a bit of a trip into Europe, and just kind of, enjoying a lot about food and wine and all those good things. Came home and we were both ready for the next thing, which I thought was just about getting back into doing some strategic marketing work, which is what I'd studied, done my first degree in. And he was a painter and artist, and he said, my parents' vineyard is on the market, and I reckon that would really help in grounding me and balancing my painting, which is very kind of esoteric and in my head, with something more earthy and connected and productive. And that's how I think I can contribute to this family unit. And we could have more children there and raise them on the land. And you've always loved wine, and you've always talked about making. You have this potential ability to be a winemaker. I was just like, what are you talking about? I don't know where you get this from. And then the idea wouldn't leave me. And I just started to just build on and develop this fascination with the fact that I could be a maker. I already was a maker of sorts, but more in baking and playing around with perfume or, oil-based perfumes and, all sorts of stuff that I would always do. And I'd studied sonotropathy and, I was just interested in tinctures and all these kind of things. But I couldn't let the idea go. And he'd grown up on this vineyard. His parents had it on the market. It was a really renowned vineyard for quality. It was a contributor to, an icon vineyard it was known as, which meant it contributed regularly to Penfolds, or was contracted to Penfolds. So it was a regular contributor to Grange and some of their top brands. And I thought, God, how am I going to do this? I'm working with such potentially expensive fruit in that we would hold back what we needed and sell the rest on. And I don't know what I'm doing. And so he and I sat down. He said, well, he didn't really know what he was doing either as a grower. So how are we going to do this? He'd grown up there, but that's very different, and knowing how to achieve extraordinary excellence every year. And so we both engaged people who were leaders in their field. So a viticulturalist that he knew about and really admired and trusted, that could take him on a journey of learning. And I did the same with a technical winemaker that could take me on that learning of the sciences that I needed in order to make sense of what I could taste. And I'd never really questioned what I could taste. I just needed to learn the science. And so we both went on this journey, and for 4 years, I think it was, so from 97 to 2001, I gave away the wines I made each vintage, so they were my barbecue wines, and really learning. And we sold, pretty much all the fruit on except for what I held back to learn really the science of what I was trying to achieve flavour-wise. And the first wine I made off that vineyard was a wine that in Latin what meant fruit of the earth or fruit of frugal earth. And I was really trying to capture in the bottle what I was tasting at full ripeness in that vineyard in vintage, and what I could smell and what was coming off that land. So for me, the challenge, those connections were already happening in my olfactory system. I just needed to learn how to create them. And so we started this process, and then in 2001 I released my first Shiraz, and then over the course of years I started to win some national awards and international awards, and thought, I might be able to do this. I might be okay at this. And really, in starting Sparkke in 2016 as a for-purpose company, I'd already started giving money from a range of more daily drinking, affordable wines to companies, to charities essentially around Australia. And I was looking at trying to connect my making with purpose. So it felt great to be a winemaker that was becoming known for quality and ability and those kind of things, but I needed to contribute forward. I needed to do more and directly connect that to my work. So I was starting to give money away to charities, but it was really interesting that because I was an alcohol producer, they didn't want to acknowledge any kind of partnership. So it was fine for me to just give money like everyone else, just in the front end of the website, but there was no ability to form any kind of partnership that was more deep and meaningful, and that I could actually let other people know that I was giving this money away and doing something that, I was intending to build on as a maker that contributed to charities in that space. So I thought that's really interesting. So it was a combination of that and meeting and working and starting a business with Carrie Allen called Sparkke, where we thought, isn't it interesting that an alcohol company can't contribute money and be associated with charities, but companies that, make products that are full of sugar that can, cause chronic disease in things like diabetes or whatever, it's fine to be acknowledged and connected to charities. So we just thought there's so much social change and social learning that needs to happen. Let's create an alcohol company or a beverage company for good, and for good, for the purpose of changing the industry for good and making beverages that are all natural, delicious, mid-strength by category, and doing good work, like contributing forward, not out of profit, but directly out of what we're making. And we'll just work like crazy to try and get the company to a point of making profit, rather than trading or greenwashing or social washing off the fact that we're contributing. But it would take years to actually make a profit to then be able to start contributing. So a company that's been very much founded from deep values and then growing from that point.
Rose, you have so much on. I can't even keep up. I'm not sure how you handle it. What are you most looking forward to after the year that we've had?
I think I'm looking forward to giving my team a chance to do what they do best in an environment that is more deeply corrected. So what I mean by that is, if I go back to looking at what's happening in terms of this new COVID normal space for my Sparkke team, for example, we're operating and trying to appear like the world is normal and operate normally, but the team is challenged by the fact that we are not in a normal scenario. But no one wants to know that or remember that or be reminded by that. And so you're in an environment where you're trying to be hospitable and welcome people whilst also juggle all of this new information and new way of doing things in order to keep everyone safe. And I'm really looking forward to my team being able to do this with less effort and more joy because it is somehow easier for them to do it. I think that would give me a huge amount of joy. I'm looking forward in the other aspects of my life to the farm and to Pargo, the luxury retreat, to my children. I'm looking for more contact, more time, more, I guess, not connections. I'm actually really connected with my children and I feel very lucky, but I feel like there needs to be more time around the doing of things, which doesn't sound surprising given that I've got a lot on. But to be a maker, you need to be able to hold something and look at it from every angle and smell it and taste it and remake it a number of times and critique it. And I made a number of things. I actually launched a spirit range for Sparkke last year based on distilling brews that were aging because of COVID and that a lot of restaurants and bars are closed down that would normally have been pulling through Sparkke stock. And so it was just an incredibly difficult environment in which to make and to have that beautiful opportunity to be deeply creative that helps build, the nuance and sophistication that I look for in the things that I make. And I'm looking forward this year to hopefully have a bit more space, buffer time around the really exciting work that I've got ahead of me in the space of making as a maker, both with my winemaking and also for Sparkke across brews and distilling that really deeply excite me. And I'm just really looking forward to that sense of moving out of just knee-jerk responses to an environment and back into a better space that has a film or a space around it in order to protect you long enough to build something that you're deeply proud of.
Well, Rose, your energy is inspiring, and we're very honoured that you had a little bit of spare time to talk to us today to share just a bit about what you're doing. Really look forward to seeing what you do over the next year, and especially with the project in Melbourne when you get your hands on the building.
Yeah, thank you.
We've loved having you on Deep in the Weeds today. Please keep in touch, and we'll talk again soon.
I will do. Thanks, Anthony, for having me.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.